There are traumas that people carry in silence because speaking about them means reliving them, because sharing them means being defined by them, because revealing them risks judgment and disbelief, and the kind of exposure that makes you vulnerable all over again. When 34-year-old Catherine Mitchell walked onto the Family Feud stage in October 2025, she appeared to be just another contestant, excited to play a game show. She was poised and articulate, smiling with her team, laughing at Steve Harvey's jokes. But Catherine was carrying a story that would stop the show completely, a story about being sex-trafficked as a teenager, surviving 4 years of unimaginable horror, escaping at 19, and spending the last 15 years rebuilding her life from nothing. And when she chose to reveal that story in the middle of a game, when she used a survey question about overcoming adversity as an opportunity to speak a truth she had been silent about for most of her life, Steve Harvey would stand frozen in shock before making a decision that this moment deserved more than a game show format could provide. What happened next would prove that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is tell their story, and that platforms matter less than purpose. Before we dive into this story of survival, courage, and the choice to speak truth to power, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Because what you are about to witness will remind you that human trafficking is not something that happens to other people in other places, and that survivors walk among us every day carrying stories we cannot imagine. The Family Feud studio that October afternoon looked exactly as it always did. Two families stood ready to compete, and the setup suggested a standard, entertaining episode. On one side stood the Rodriguez family from Houston, a warm extended family group. On the other side stood what was listed as Catherine's team from Portland, Oregon, which included Catherine Mitchell, 34, her wife Rebecca, 36, Catherine's therapist Dr. Sarah Goldman, her advocate coordinator Maria Santos, and her best friend from college, James Chen. Catherine Mitchell stood at the center of her team with perfect posture and a carefully controlled expression. She was beautiful in a deliberate way, with professionally styled hair and makeup that looked like armor, the kind of presentation that people use when they need the world to see strength instead of vulnerability. She smiled when appropriate, laughed at Steve Harvey's warm-up jokes, but there was something about her stillness that suggested she was holding something very tightly controlled. Steve Harvey worked the stage with his usual energy, greeting both families, establishing rapport. When he reached Catherine's team, he noticed immediately that it was an unusual composition. Catherine Mitchell and team from Portland, I have to ask, this does not look like a typical family setup. Tell me about your team. Catherine's voice was steady and clear. Steve, this is my chosen family. My wife Rebecca, my therapist Dr. Goldman, my advocate coordinator Maria, and my best friend James. They are the people who saved my life, and I wanted them here with me today. Steve's expression shifted slightly, picking up on the weight of that statement. Saved your life? That sounds like there is a story there. There is, Catherine said, but we can talk about that later. Let us play some Family Feud first. Steve nodded, though his curiosity was clearly piqued, and the game began. The first round proceeded normally. Both teams played well, with Catherine showing impressive knowledge and quick thinking. She was competitive but not aggressive, supportive of her teammates, gracious when the other team scored. Everything appeared completely normal. Then came the third round, and the question that appeared on the board was designed to be uplifting and general. Name something people do to overcome a difficult past. The Rodriguez family went first and gave answers that got good responses. Therapy, prayer, finding new hobbies. The audience reacted positively to each one. Then it was Catherine's team's turn, and Steve pointed to Catherine. Catherine, name something people do to overcome a difficult past. Catherine looked at the survey question on the board. She looked at Steve. She looked at her wife Rebecca, who nodded slightly, a gesture that clearly meant you can do this. Then Catherine took a deep breath and made a decision. Therapy, she said, which was already on the board as the number one answer. Her team celebrated briefly. Then Catherine continued speaking, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the studio. And telling your story, even when it is terrifying, even when you have kept it secret for years, even when you are afraid of what people will think. Steve Harvey's smile faded. He was looking at Catherine with the focused attention of someone who recognized that something important was about to happen. Steve, Catherine said, her voice shaking slightly now but determined. I need to tell you something. And I need to tell everyone watching, because I have been silent for too long and I am done being silent. Steve set his cards down immediately. Okay, I am listening. Catherine's hands were trembling, but her voice grew stronger. From the time I was 15 until I was 19 years old, I was a victim of sex trafficking. I was groomed by someone I trusted, sold to multiple people, moved between cities, raped repeatedly, beaten, starved, and told every day that I was worthless and that no one would ever believe me if I tried to escape. And for 4 years, I survived that, until I finally found a way out. The studio went completely silent. The kind of silence that happens when everyone in the room stops breathing at the same time. Steve Harvey's face went through a rapid sequence of emotions: shock, disbelief, horror, compassion. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Catherine continued, tears now streaming down her face but her voice not stopping. I escaped when I was 19. A client left his phone unattended and I used it to call a trafficking hotline. They helped coordinate with police. I was rescued. But rescue was just the beginning. Because after you escape trafficking, you have to rebuild your entire life from nothing. You have no education, no job skills, no family who wants you back because they think you chose that life. You have PTSD and trust issues and trauma so deep that some days you cannot get out of bed. Steve Harvey finally found his voice, though it was hoarse. Catherine, I do not even know what to say. I am so sorry. I am so sorry that happened to you. Thank you, Catherine said. But I did not share this to get sympathy. I shared this because human trafficking is happening right now, in every city in this country, and most people do not know about it. They think it is something that happens in other countries or to other people. But it happened to me, a white girl from a middle-class family in Oregon. It happened in Portland and Seattle and Sacramento. It happened in hotels and houses and places where hundreds of people walked by every day and never noticed. She looked directly at the camera. Now there are teenagers being trafficked in your city. Right now there are victims who are trying to survive one more day. Right now there are people who could help but do not because they do not recognize the signs. Steve Harvey walked closer to Catherine, and when he spoke, his voice carried profound respect. Catherine, what you are doing right now, sharing your story on television, that takes more courage than anything I have ever witnessed. I want you to know that. He turned to the producers. Stop the game. We are not playing Family Feud right now. This is more important. Within minutes, chairs had been brought onto the stage. Steve sat down with Catherine and her team, and the game show became something else entirely, a platform for one woman to tell the truth about human trafficking in America. Rebecca, Catherine's wife, spoke first. I met Catherine 7 years ago. She had been out of trafficking for 8 years at that point, but she was still struggling. Still afraid. Still believing that she was damaged and worthless. We became friends first, then more than friends. And she told me her story piece by piece when she was ready. Dr. Sarah Goldman, the therapist, added professional context. Catherine has been in therapy with me for 10 years. When she first came to me, she was suicidal. She had PTSD, severe anxiety, depression, and complex trauma from years of abuse. We have worked together to help her process what happened, to understand that none of it was her fault, and to rebuild her sense of self. Maria Santos, the advocate coordinator, explained her role. I work with an organization that helps trafficking survivors. Catherine connected with us 6 years ago. We helped her with job training, housing assistance, legal support, and connecting with other survivors. One of the most important parts of recovery is understanding you are not alone. James Chen, the best friend, shared his perspective. I met Catherine in college. She had gotten her GED and enrolled in community college when she was 23. She was brilliant but terrified. She barely spoke in class. She sat in the back. She flinched when people touched her accidentally. I did not know her story then, but I knew she had been through something. We became friends slowly. And when she finally told me what had happened, I just listened. That is what she needed. Someone to listen without judgment. Steve turned back to Catherine. How did this happen? How does someone become trafficked? Because I think most people watching have no idea how this actually works. Catherine took a deep breath. It starts with grooming. When I was 15, I met someone online, a man who said he was 18 but was actually 32. He was kind at first, interested in me, made me feel special. My home life was not great. My parents were going through a divorce, I was struggling in school, I felt alone, and he gave me attention. She paused, gathering herself. He convinced me to meet him in person, told me he loved me, told me we could run away together. I was 15 and stupid and I believed him, so I left with him, and within a week everything changed. He started controlling where I went, who I talked to, what I wore. Then he started selling me. Told me it was temporary just to make money so we could be together. But it was not temporary, it became my life. Her voice broke but she kept going. For 4 years, I was sold to different men, sometimes in hotels, sometimes in houses, sometimes in trucks or cars. I was moved between cities so I could not establish any connections. I was given just enough food to survive. I was beaten if I tried to resist. And I was told constantly that this was my fault, that I had chosen this, that no one would believe me if I said I was being forced. Steve Harvey was visibly struggling not to cry. And your family, did they try to find you? At first, yes. My mother filed a missing persons report, but the trafficker had coached me on what to say if I was ever questioned. I told police I had run away, that I was fine, that I did not want to go home. They believed me. Or they did not care enough to investigate further, so the case was closed and my family gave up looking. Maria Santos added context. This is a common pattern with trafficking. Victims are coached to say they are fine if questioned. They are moved frequently so they cannot be tracked. And law enforcement often does not recognize the signs. They see a runaway teenager, not a trafficking victim. Steve looked at the camera, his face showing controlled fury. So you're telling me that there are teenagers being trafficked right now, and when police encounter them, they just assume they are runaways and let them go? Yes, Maria said simply. That is exactly what I am telling you. The systems we have in place are not designed to identify trafficking victims. Police are not trained to ask the right questions. Social workers are overwhelmed, and traffickers exploit those gaps. Steve turned back to Catherine. How did you escape? A client left his phone on the nightstand while he was in the bathroom. I had maybe 2 minutes. I called the National Human Trafficking Hotline. The operator stayed on the phone with me, got my location, contacted local police. They raided the house I was being held in that night. I was rescued along with 3 other girls. She wiped her eyes. But rescue is traumatic too. Police treated me like a criminal at first, not a victim. They questioned me for hours. They did not believe parts of my story. It took intervention from a social worker to get them to understand I had been trafficked, not prostituting myself voluntarily. Dr. Goldman spoke with clinical precision. This is another systemic failure. Trafficking victims are often arrested for prostitution instead of being identified as victims of a crime. They are put in jail instead of being connected with services. The trauma of that re-victimizes them. Steve Harvey shook his head in disbelief and disgust. This is happening in America, right now, in 2025. Children are being sold for sex and our systems are failing them. Yes, Catherine said firmly. And that is why I am sharing my story, because people need to know this is happening. They need to understand the signs. They need to know how to help. Steve leaned forward. Okay, tell everyone watching. What are the signs? How can people identify trafficking victims? Maria Santos, the advocate, answered. Look for young people who are with significantly older partners. Look for people who seem fearful, who do not speak for themselves, who defer to someone else for all answers. Look for people who do not have identification or control over their own documents. Look for inconsistencies in their story. Look for signs of physical abuse, malnutrition, or being controlled. She continued, and most importantly, if you suspect someone is being trafficked, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Do not try to intervene yourself. Do not confront the trafficker, just call the hotline and let professionals handle it. Steve looked at Catherine with profound respect. What happened after you were rescued? I was placed in a shelter for trafficking survivors. I spent 2 years there learning how to be a person again, learning that I had value. Learning basic life skills that most people take for granted. I got my GED, I started therapy, I started to believe that maybe I could have a future. She smiled slightly through her tears. Then I went to community college, then I transferred to Portland State University. I got my bachelor's degree in social work. And now I work as an advocate helping other trafficking survivors. I do the work that was done for me. I help people escape. I help them rebuild. I help them understand they are not damaged or worthless or forever broken. Steve Harvey stood up and applauded. The entire studio followed. The applause went on for over a minute, people on their feet, some crying, all recognizing the extraordinary courage of what Catherine had just done. When the applause finally died down, Steve spoke directly to the camera. I want everyone watching to understand something. Catherine Mitchell was trafficked for 4 years. 4 years of rape and abuse and trauma that most of us cannot even imagine. And she survived, she escaped, she rebuilt her entire life. She went to college, she became a social worker. She got married, she is helping other survivors, she is proof that recovery is possible. He turned back to Catherine. But you did not have to share this story publicly, you could have kept it private. Why did you choose to speak out? Catherine's answer was immediate. because silence protects traffickers. Silence allows this to continue. Every trafficking survivor who speaks out makes it a little bit harder for traffickers to operate because we are making people aware. We are educating, we are demanding change. I stayed silent for 15 years because I was ashamed, but I am done being ashamed. This was not my fault. I was a child who was groomed and sold and abused. That is on the trafficker, not on me. Rebecca, her wife, added, Catherine is the bravest person I know. She survived unimaginable trauma, and instead of letting it destroy her, she turned it into purpose. She helps other survivors every day, and now she is helping people she will never meet by sharing her story. Steve Harvey nodded slowly. Catherine, I want to do something. Family Feud is going to make a substantial donation to the organization you work with, and we are going to use our platform to raise awareness about trafficking. This is not just a game show anymore. This is a mission. He looked at the camera again. If you or someone you know is being trafficked, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888. That number is on your screen right now. Call it, text it, use it. Help is available. Escape is possible. You are not alone. The episode that aired 3 weeks later was preceded by an extended introduction from Steve Harvey explaining what viewers were about to see. The producers had included extensive resources about trafficking, how to recognize it, how to report it, where to get help. They created a companion website with more information, and they made trafficking awareness a permanent part of the Family Feud platform. The response was overwhelming. The National Human Trafficking Hotline reported a 400% increase in calls in the week after the episode aired. Law enforcement agencies across the country contacted Catherine's organization, asking for training on identifying trafficking victims. Schools implemented educational programs. Parents started having conversations with their teenagers about grooming and online predators. But perhaps most importantly, other survivors started coming forward. Hundreds of people who had been trafficked and had never spoken about it publicly watched Catherine's story and found the courage to share their own. Support groups formed. Advocacy organizations saw increased funding and volunteers. The conversation about trafficking in America fundamentally shifted. Catherine gave interviews in the months following the episode. I was terrified to share my story publicly. I was afraid people would judge me, would see me as damaged, would define me by my trauma. But the response has been the opposite. People have been supportive and compassionate. And most importantly, I have heard from other survivors who said my story gave them hope. She continued in one interview, recovery is not linear. I still have bad days. I still have triggers. I still struggle with PTSD. But I am no longer defined by what happened to me. I am defined by how I survived it and what I am doing with my life now. 5 years after the Family Feud episode aired, Catherine had become one of the leading voices in the anti-trafficking movement. She testified before Congress about systemic failures in identifying and supporting trafficking victims. She trained law enforcement agencies across the country. She spoke at universities and conferences. And she continued her work, helping individual survivors rebuild their lives. The organization she worked with saw their capacity increase tenfold due to the awareness and funding generated by her Family Feud appearance. They opened new shelters, expanded job training programs, and provided more comprehensive support services. 10 years after the episode, Steve Harvey did a retrospective interview about the most impactful moments from Family Feud. Catherine Mitchell changed me. Before that day, I thought I understood human trafficking. But I did not. I had no idea it was happening in every American city. I had no idea how our systems were failing victims. I had no idea what survivors went through to rebuild their lives. Catherine educated me, and she educated millions of people watching. That is not entertainment, that is purpose. He continued, what Catherine did took extraordinary courage. She stood on a game show stage and told the world her deepest trauma. She made herself vulnerable in front of millions of people. Why? Because she knew that her story could save someone else. That is heroism, that is sacrifice. That is using your pain to prevent someone else's. Catherine and Rebecca, now married for 10 years, gave a joint interview about their life. People ask me if I see Catherine as a victim, Rebecca said. And I do not. I see her as a survivor. I see her as a fighter. I see her as someone who refused to let her trauma define her. Yes, she was trafficked. Yes, terrible things happened to her. But that is not who she is. Who she is the person who survived and chose to help others survive too. Catherine added, I want other survivors to know that recovery is possible. It is hard, it is not quick, there are setbacks, but you can rebuild, you can have a career, you can have relationships, you can have joy, you can be more than what was done to you. If you have been moved by this story of survival, courage, and the choice to speak truth to power, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this with someone who works with young people. Share this with someone who needs to understand what human trafficking actually looks like. Remember that Catherine Mitchell was trafficked from age 15 to 19 in Portland, Seattle, and Sacramento. She was not taken from another country. She was an American teenager groomed online, sold repeatedly, and failed by systems that should have protected her. This is not something that happens elsewhere to other people. This is happening now in every American city. Right now there are teenagers being trafficked. Right now there are victims trying to survive one more day. Right now there are people who could help if they recognized the signs. Catherine survived 4 years of unimaginable trauma. She escaped at 19 with nothing. She spent 15 years rebuilding herself through therapy, education, and support from people who believed in her. And then she chose to share her story publicly to help others. That is not victimhood, that is power. That is taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and using it to prevent the worst thing from happening to someone else. The National Human Trafficking Hotline is 1-888-373-7888. If you suspect trafficking, call. If you need help escaping, call. If you are a survivor who needs support, call. Resources exist. Help is available. And stories like Catherine's prove that recovery is possible. Steve Harvey stood on that Family Feud stage unable to believe what he was hearing, but he listened. He stopped the game. He gave Catherine the platform she needed to educate millions of people. That is what allies do. That is what platforms are for, not just entertainment but education, not just distraction but awareness, not just games but truth. Catherine was not just a contestant that day, she was a survivor choosing to speak. And her voice changed everything.